Hi guys, I wanted to give you a few notes regarding World War II. We moved pretty quickly through the war and some of that stuff. So I thought it would be good just to put this together for those of you who need a little bit more background. We spend a great deal of time on World War II in world history, but I know in the AP class it can be really, really fast. Because that's how it is. So let's just kind of go over a few things and then please feel free to follow up with me with any questions you may have. All right, so this is a pretty big deal right here, this chart, this graph that I've got going on, and it shows you oil production in tons with the US compared to Germany. So as you can see, Germany starts fighting in the war technically in 1939. The US doesn't enter until, the very end of 41, so we don't count that too much on this chart. But you can see by the time 1942 rolls around, how huge the production is by the United States in comparison to Germany. And Germany had a huge war machine, and I'll show you a map to how big their empire the Nazis grew to. And that was quite devastating to them, this lack of natural resources. And Hitler made some really key mistakes in trying to acquire those and then just kind of given up before he got them, which of course turned out to be good for the Allies. But just to show that, one thing to note is that during World War II for Americans, that consumer goods was totally limited or actually stopped. So for example, if you want to try to find an old car from 1943, an old Ford, you're not going to. Very, very few, if any, were made because all the production capability went towards building planes, tanks, ships, the aircraft carriers, all those different things that were necessary for the war effort. And then this is in addition to some other consumer goods, like my grandmother used to tell me about how sad she was she couldn't have actual stockings because the nylon or the silk, I don't know what it was at the time, to be honest, I should, but it went for parachutes. So all the young girls at the time were devastated they couldn't have stockings because you didn't ever have bare legs. All right, so just kind of an interesting thing. Here's another graph that kind of shows you how the U.S. really helped in this effort. So aircraft and vehicles, and then this is the world combined. So the world, both Allies and Axis combined when we talk about world versus the United States. And in terms of aircraft, the United States created 52% of the entire air fleet. And then vehicles would include like tanks and jeeps and things like that. And we were 48% in comparison to the whole world. So the biggest way the U.S. helped win the war was not because of the bravery and hard fighting by our soldiers. That definitely is something we want to acknowledge, of course. But the biggest way was, in fact, because of the industrial production, the capabilities of our factories to turn these things out. And I do want to point out and remind you guys that this is why the United States got out of the Great Depression, because all these Americans had jobs and were able to go back to work. All right. Let's see. So the next little slide has to do with Churchill and FDR, Franklin Roosevelt. And this is a photograph that was taken in 1941. Boy, I feel like FDR looks older than that, but this is 41. And this was during the Atlantic Charter. So before the United States joined the war. And this is where the United States is going to pledge its support in a broad way for the British, for the United Kingdom. Of course, we haven't joined the war, so it's not an alliance, but this is a thing. And Franklin Roosevelt, it is pretty sad. He's going to die in April of 1945. When he did, this is a quote that Winston Churchill said that I think just helps remind people of their great friendship. In Franklin Roosevelt, there died the greatest American friend we have ever known and the greatest champion of freedom who has ever brought help and comfort from the new world to the old. So they were quite the duo there, the two of them. All right, let's see. Okay, here's a map of Europe in 1939. So this is seen as the actual start of World War II in Europe. And you can see where Greater Germany is. And then by 1939, we're going to have Germany just expand its borders east into Poland. They actually had a pact with the Soviet Union, the Hitler-Stalin pact, that said they would not attack one another and that they would divide up Poland. So in our world history textbooks here in the United States, we tend to brush over the Soviet Union taking over Poland and just focus on the advancement of the Nazis. My guess is because the Soviet Union was technically our ally. So during World War II, we're going to have allies of Britain and France. If you notice on this map, the Soviet Union is not allied with them at that time, and it's not at war with Germany, okay? And that's going to come. So in 1939, Hitler invaded Poland September 1st, 39. I had a kid come up with a quote, September 1st, 39, Hitler said, Poland's mine. So there's a good way to remember that date. Now here's 1940, and again, the Soviet Union is still not at war with Germany. They're still technically allies with the Nazis, and you can see that Germany has, by this time, has attacked and defeated France. There is a small region to the south known as Vichy France, but Paris and all of northern France has been taken, okay? And then they also have alliances with other areas. So you've got that. Now, by 44, which is going to jump ahead, I know, we've got a change happening. So take a look here. The Soviet Union is now part of the alliance. That's actually going to happen in 1941. Hitler is going to, I'll go back here. 1941, Hitler is going to move east into the Soviet Union and attack at Leningrad up here in the north. I don't know if you can see my cursor. So he's going to go there, and then he's going to go to Stalingrad, and that is where Joseph Stalin and the Red Army will hold them to a horrible, horrible siege at Stalingrad. So that is as far as I got. Now, there's two goals Hitler has in World War II. One is to expand his empire. That's part of fascist ideology. The other is to kill all the Jews. And there are a ton of Jewish people living in Western Soviet Union. And as he moves his army into the Soviet Union, as Hitler does that, he has a group called the Einsatzgruppen that would follow his army and basically round up any Jewish civilians and take them to a field and shoot them. And that's how he did that. And he realized quickly that that was not going to be efficient enough. He needed the bullets for the war. And that is when they switch gears and they start to have the concentration camps. They start to build the death camps. That's after the Wannsee conference. So unfortunately, we can't get into all that, but that's all happening. All right, so Hitler's expanding his empire, expanding. And by 44 is where we're going to see the end of that. Some of you guys looked at the Battle of the Bulge. That's going to be further in 1945. So 1944, we see the expansion about how big he gets. This map might be a little bit later. Well, no, it's January, so it's pretty good. And that is when we're going to start to see the Allies turning the tide. So you can't see, sorry if I move that thing, but the Allies are also fighting the Germans in North Africa. Hitler is trying to get to the oil fields in the Middle East across North Africa, which that land had been colonized by the French, British, and Italians. So he's trying to move there. Of course, he is allied with the Italians, but they aren't that good in Africa. He has to kind of save them with one of his best generals, Erwin Rommel, and he does that. And then the Italians themselves overthrow Mussolini, kill Mussolini. They're sick of the war, and so you start to see things turn. As soon as the Allies get North Africa, they're able to use that as a jumping point into Italy. I want to move my cursor, but that thing's going to bump up here. So, but here's right down here, right above that line, we've got the Allies moving up into Italy. And so they're going to start to squish the Axis powers back from the south. The Soviet army is going to come from the east and start pushing. They're going to get on a roll and just start crushing the Nazis. And then, of course, with D-Day, we're going to have the Allies, American, Canadian forces, and the British forces coming here into France on a land invasion. And so I wish you could see my hands. I'm just squishing Germany back to its borders. All right. And I've got a couple videos, but they won't work with this loom thing. So we'll just leave those. And there's plenty online if you want to watch some videos. But here is the Pacific. So we'll just kind of switch gears. So September 1st, 1939. So again, the start of the war in Europe. This is kind of the other side of it. And by this time, you can see where we have all these colonies, right? The European powers had colonized this area in the late 1800s, or late 1880s. 1890s. And then Japan had invaded Manchuria in the 30s and had already colonized and occupied that territory. So remember, Japan had this idea of having Asia for the Asians. That was kind of their broad goal. But yet they were also going to be taking over Asian held land in China. So, kind of take that with a grain of salt. Okay, here's Pearl Harbor. And let me go back really quick. Hawaii is right, if you can find Pacific Ocean, it's just to the south of that. So it's way out in the Pacific. The Americans knew an attack was coming. There was chatter on it and they were decoding messages and whatnot. But they thought, oh gosh, I got to go back again. They thought that this was going to actually take place in the Philippines. So remember, we acquired the Philippines with the Spanish-American War. And this is where they thought the attack would take place. That really just made more sense. However, the early morning of December 7th, 1941, about 8 in the morning, they launched an attack. As you can see, this is the island of Oahu. Hawaii is a chain of islands. And this is why this was such a great Navy base. So you can see that this is a big bay with an island, Ford Island, and it is protective. So these ships are protected naturally by the ocean. Obviously they need to withstand the ocean, but this gives them safe harbor. You can unload and load things safely, not have to deal with waves and all those elements. So the harbors are very important. Why San Francisco Bay is very important. It gives them an inlet and a natural calm. The bay is much calmer than the ocean. So that is where a bunch of our naval ships were. Luckily on that morning, the aircraft carriers were not there. So you can see the first wave came here from the west, and then the second wave a little bit later, an hour later, came from the east and attacked. And then there is an air base right there as well. So again, I don't think that trailer will show, but I know they're hard to watch on videos anyways. But this is the inlet. So that island right there that we saw, this little island right there, that is going to be blown up here to this level. And you can see just how many ships are there. So it's not like just this like tiny little speck in the ocean. This actually is pretty good territory. And the orange show that those were sunk. So California's battleship was sunk. And then the yellow is damaged and the blue is undamaged. And then these are I know the thing is hard to see. These are all battleships. So battleships are all named after states. And then we have some cruisers and other kind of ships out there. But again, the aircraft carriers, which are pretty much like cities, those were all at sea. All right, now this is 1942, so jumping ahead. I don't have the year on this, but this is going to be actually like spring of 42. This is going to be the expansion of the Japanese empire. This is as big as it gets. It doesn't show it all because we don't have like Midway Island in here, which would be a little bit over here to the side. But what is going to happen is that a way to conquer this is, for example, the Philippines were controlled by the Americans, and the Americans had to leave. Douglas MacArthur was the Allied Supreme Commander. He was an American general there, and he said, I shall return, and he had to retreat. And so what they did is they devised a strategy of what's called island hopping. And MacArthur, I think, explained it best. He said, hit them where they ain't and let them die on the vine. So what that means is that the Americans would attack or go to islands that were loosely populated by the Japanese army and bypass heavily occupied islands. And the goal was to get to the mainland Japan. And so, for example, if the Japanese are here and then there's some little islands over here, the United States would go to these little unmarked islands here and then try to cut off the supply lines to the Caroline Islands. So those Japanese soldiers, the whatnot, they needed resources. Now they can't get them from Japan, right? So it's just this slow move towards Japan, cutting them off, and just trying to keep them from getting supplies, refueled, all that good stuff. And of course, we island hop towards Okinawa and Iwo Jima, which you can see here. Some of you guys looked at those individually. And the goal of these two islands, especially Okinawa, the goal was to be close enough for a land invasion, which, of course, once the atomic bomb got into play, we did not do a land invasion. So here is the atomic bomb, and it was, of course, dropped on Hiroshima on August 6th. Before we dropped the bomb, we told Japan, we've got this great weapon. It's unbelievable, and it's going to do great devastation. But the Japanese refused to surrender. The United States was asking for an unconditional surrender. That means surrender without conditions. I know that seems obvious. But what the Japanese wanted was to maintain their emperor, and the United States did not want them to maintain their emperor because it was kind of like a hero worship deal. And even though the military really controlled Japan, they wanted to instill, they being America, instill a democratic society in Japan. So that was a condition they had. We want to keep our emperor, and the United States said, no, this is an unconditional surrender. By this time, guys, the war in Europe had ended. So the war in Europe ends on May 8th. Sadly, Franklin Roosevelt died a month before. Hitler also will commit suicide right at the end of the war, right before they surrender in May. So the first week in May, he's going to die. I don't have that date memorized. Sorry. So the war in Europe is over. So now the United States can fully concentrate on ending this war in the Pacific. So the first bomb is dropped at Hiroshima. They did not surrender. We again say, we've got another one, because we did. We had to. And they said, too bad, so sad. So we dropped that second bomb 3 days later on a little town called Nagasaki. Now, I've got some images for you. These are pretty graphic, of course, and then some quotes. You can pause and read the quotes. Sorry, that thing will go away. But of course, this definitely inflicted great horror on the civilians. Here's another quote. You guys can go ahead and pause that if you'd like to read them. They are very graphic. I tried to pick good quotes for you. So go ahead and pause if you'd like. And then here, finally, we see the surrender. So finally, on September 2nd is what we call VJ Day, meaning victory over Japan. And we have the Japanese military and dignitaries coming to the USS Missouri battleship to formally surrender. Here is Douglas MacArthur, again, the Allied Supreme Commander, and he is signing these surrender documents for the United States, or we aren't surrendering, but he's signing them as the accepting them. And you can see the crowd all around him. Here's another image of them. They do this in the Tokyo Bay, so just outside Japan. Of course, all these naval, I can't even imagine what it would be like to be there. And then here is just kind of a show of force. This is after the surrender, but we've got just kind of a show of force of the military kind of flying in celebration. Gosh, that thing really bothers me. All right, and then here, this is on the USS Missouri, and that's the spot. And if you've ever been to Hawaii and been to Pearl Harbor, the Missouri is now docked at the Arizona Memorial, and that plaque is on the ship, and you can go to it. I got to go. They have little ropes around it, so you can't step on it or stand on it. But oh boy, guys, talk about feeling history. That is a goosebump moment to stand right there and to think that is where this took place, right here, and how important that was. So anyways, yes, in Hawaii today, Oahu, Pearl Harbor, the USS Arizona was a ship that sunk, and many sailors could not get out of the Arizona. It had just been fueled, so it was full of fuel, did catch on fire, and then of course the oil and water do not mix, so any oil on top of the water caught on fire. It was a horrific thing. They dismantled the bridge off of the Arizona. So this little thing, if you can see my cursor, it's right in the center, the circular piece, that is part of the Arizona. It's just below the water surface. So the bridge on the boat or the ship is right here. I don't know if you can see that on the Missouri. And so they have that. And then the memorial goes across. So the Arizona is lined up with the Missouri. They're like in line. So they retired the Missouri, all these old battleships. They were in business all the way, some of them through the 90s, and then they were able to take them out of service. The Cold War had ended, weren't seen as useful. They weren't as very modern. They're not very modern. I've been on a few of these guys. Their ships, though, are their guns. These guns here, it's so crazy. They're accurate up to 7 miles, which feels pretty good to me, but apparently today we are way better with that technology. So the Missouri is there. I think that's a really neat thing. When I got to go there a few years ago, and it took me back. It gave me a moment. It gave me it was pretty emotional to think like the Missouri is sitting there keeping guard over the people that are still in the remains of the Arizona. They have left some of the sailors there because the families thought that was best. Some sailors, some veterans who die after will actually ask to be their ashes to be buried or placed inside the ship. So this was a big deal for all of those who were there on that day. So I hope you guys can go visit their USS Arizona and the USS Missouri one day. Just a side note, last little note, just because I love these ships. There were 4 ships in the Iowa class, which the Missouri is part of. So it was the Iowa, Missouri, New Jersey, and I think it's Wisconsin is the other one. I've been on 3 of them. I haven't been on the 4th one. I can't name. I think it's Wisconsin. The Iowa is down by Long Beach. So if you ever go down to LA, it's pretty cool. And the Iowa class. So the Iowa was the lead ship in that. And actually, that was the one Franklin Roosevelt would go on if he was ever in the Pacific. They had a bathtub in the Iowa for him because, as you guys know, he had polio and could not stand on his own. And so he had to bathe instead of take showers. But the reason they did the surrender documents on the Missouri was because Harry Truman was from Missouri. And when Franklin Roosevelt passed away in April of 1945, Harry Truman had just been vice president for about a month, about 5 weeks. And he hadn't been as vice president for all those terms. Just the last term, he became vice president. And when he went to go see Eleanor Roosevelt, he said to Eleanor Roosevelt, he said, what can I do for you? Let me know if there's anything I can do for you. And she said to him, oh, no, Mr. Truman. The question is, what can we do for you? So he was in a kind of, like, whoa, he was thrown into it. He didn't even know, he hadn't even been prepped about the atomic bomb. So he didn't even know that was being built because, of course, it was built over time. So anyways, all right, you guys, some fun stories. Sorry if I'm going on. I sure miss getting to go into more details with you guys in class, but please feel free to ask any questions you have. I try not to blab too much when I'm, just holding you hostage on Zoom. So try to do it this way. All right, you guys.